merchants who were effectively being taxed to subsidize the newcomer.
You have a chapter in here about an economics professor who embraced the idea of getting government out of the way of business, and yet then he turned around and made cultivating government his business, quote, leaving behind a trail of death and costs that were shifted onto the taxpayers. And he went on to become our government's Treasury Secretary.
John Snow was a brilliant young economics professor and lawyer who wrote about how the government system of regulating transportation was inefficient and causing difficult costs, and in the Ford administration had a prominent role in promoting deregulation of trucking. Then he got a job with the CSX, what's now the CSX Railroad.
And what is CSX?
It's one of the largest railroad companies in America. And his mentor, Hayes Watkins, won an award from Industry Week magazine. And the whole reason for the award was their success at milking the government for favors. And Snow, throughout his career, spent an enormous amount of time going and meeting, not with presidents of the United States, but with the congressmen and senators and the staff members and the bureaucrats you're never going to hear about in the Transportation Department and the Appropriation Department to get all the rules and favors that he wanted. And one of the worst rules is this. If you're on an Amtrak train and there is an accident and something happens to you, the damages that occur are always paid by the taxpayers, even if, as in the case I tell about in the book, there was a known unsafe condition that CSX caused in its zeal to cut costs and to increase Mr. Snow's salary. Even though Snow was warned and warned, this is dangerous, we're not doing enough for safety, there were official investigations, they stuck to their policy. They saved $2.4 billion. Well, people died because of it. One widow pressed her case, got all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court with it, got $50 million in damages awarded by a jury. Couldn't today because Governor Jeb Bush in Florida signed a law to prevent this from happening again. But got $50 million in damages. Didn't cost CSX a penny. They just handed the bill to the taxpayers and said, you get to pay.
Because this is a law.
That's the law.
Passed by Congress.
That's right. And this is a moral hazard. It's another thing that Adam Smith warned us about. You shouldn't be able to say, I get the rewards, and you, the taxpayer, are going to pick up all the risks.
Are you agreeing with Ronald Reagan that government is not the solution, government is the problem?
Well, there are lots of problems with government. I mean, I've spent my life exposing all sorts of problems with government. But government is fundamentally essential. Government is what creates for us civilization. We created this country so that we could be free, so that we could pursue our lives the way that we want to pursue them. And wealth is a byproduct of that. But the government is being turned into a vehicle not to ensure our liberties and create a level playing field, but instead into a vehicle to take from the many to enrich the few.
There was a stunning section in your book where you say these new rules that have come about in the last few years help Goldman Sachs and Lehman Brothers, MBNA, that's the big bank holding company, and Citibank exploit the poor, the unsophisticated, and the foolish, because these lenders can now charge rates and impose penalties that were illegal, even criminal, a generation ago.
You know, we used to put people to death 500 years ago for loaning money for interest. And for a long time, the government regulated the kind of interest that you could charge. And then we had a Supreme Court decision in 1978. And the Supreme Court in that said, you know, because the way the law is written, we're basically undoing the usury laws in this country. And Congress, pay attention. You need to do something to address this. Well, Congress did. It discovered it was a fabulous way to milk banks and related companies for campaign contributions, and they did for years and years and years and years. Now you turn on your television, and there's Gary Coleman, the former child star,
right,
promoting a loan where they'll put the money right into your bank account over the telephone, calling in on the telephone, at 99.25% interest. It's almost 2 points a week. And when I wrote that, I was thinking about a mob guy I knew who was a loan shark. And what he would have thought, because he spent some time in prison for loan sharking, if he were still alive, about these ads, where now big corporations are doing what he used to do, except they don't break your legs, they just take your house.
But we've been through 30 years of deregulation now. And as you yourself point out in Free Lunch, America today is more than twice as wealthy as it was in 1980. And the economy is putting out 2/3 more per person. I mean, you even remind us that more than half of the wealth created in this country since the United States began has been created in the past quarter century. What's the complaint about that?
Well, that's tremendous economic growth. The problem is where it's going. The increases in income and wealth are all taking place at the very top. In 2005, the richest 1% increased their income by far more than the total income of the bottom 20%. My contention is that it is government policy that is causing this to happen. That in all sorts of different ways, there was a time when government policy was to create and nurture and build a middle class. We had a GI Bill. We built an interstate highway system. We invested in education and hospitals. Now we have a government whose policy is to enrich the already rich and make them richer. That's its focus. And I believe that if we continue down that road, you create instability and you don't create as much wealth.
You point out, by the way, that that Bill Clinton, as president, gave the super rich a larger tax break than George Bush's tax cuts, right?
Yeah, I love to trot this one out when somebody goes, "Oh, you're from the New York Times. You must be, pro-Democrat or liberal or whatever." I'm the guy who broke the story and reported on the fact that Bill Clinton gave the super rich, the 400 highest income people in America, a big tax cut. They were paying 30 cents out of each dollar of their income to the federal government when he came into office. When he left, it was down to 22. Bush has lowered it to 17. Now, first of all, notice you're probably paying more than 17 cents. May well be paying more than 22. But Bush gave him an 8-cent tax cut. Clinton gave him an 8-cent tax cut, and Bush only gave them 5 cents.
Let me read you this quote from one of your critics, Larry Kudlow of National Review Online and CNBC. He wrote this a couple of years ago in response to something you had reported in the New York Times about how Bush's tax cuts on dividends and capital gains had helped people with the highest incomes. Quote, "These entrepreneurs use their God-given talents within the Reagan-esque free market framework that deregulated, slashed tax rates, and provided the first strong dose of economic incentives since the 1920s. A rising economic tide over the last 20 years has lifted living standards, productivity, and employment throughout America. Everyone got richer with a full $39 trillion in new wealth created during this period." Fair?
No, not accurate either. First of all, a rising tide lifts all boats unless you're in the dinghy tied to the dock, and then you get swamped. The poor in America, and it's not like being poor in the third world, but the poor in America are worse off. Most Americans have seen their incomes stagnate or decline slightly. People have fewer fringe benefits. They have less in retirement. They have an enormous amount of debt. For every additional dollar since 1980 that people have gotten in equity in their homes, they've taken on $2 of debt. That's not a prescription for getting well off. Entrepreneurs are people who are going to perform no matter what. And we had our greatest economic growth when we had much higher tax rates. You want entrepreneurs. You need entrepreneurs to have a good society. I don't have any problem with entrepreneurs, but we need to have a system that also fairly distributes, and government rules affect the distribution of this. It is not in a vacuum. The burdens of society and the benefits of society. And so when we have people who make billion-dollar-a-year incomes and pay 15% taxes, and janitors who pay the same tax rate, and school teachers who pay a 25% tax rate, something's amiss.
But did you notice what happened when the Democrats briefly toyed with the idea of removing that tax break from the hedge fund and private equity managers? Congress thought very briefly about removing it, and then the industry held a big party for Harry Reid, Senate Democratic Majority Leader, down in Las Vegas, and he came back from that big party and said, "I don't think we'll be taking that up anytime soon."
The problem of the political donor class's outsized influence and its grip on Congress is bipartisan. There's one party in Washington. It's the party of money. It has different wings and factions, but Washington is the party of money. And the wealthiest people in America, the large corporations in America, are busy milking the government for everything they can get, and you are paying the price of their free lunch.
The book is Free Lunch: How the Wealthiest Americans Enrich Themselves at Government Expense and Stick You with the Bill. David K. Johnston, thank you for joining me on The Journal.
Thank you.